Thank you, Mr President, and I thank members, and I might note I may need some leave for extra time in terms of moving this motion. I move, one, that this House express and place on record its deep sense of the loss sustained to the state of this House by the death of the Honourable John Jobling, AM, PhD, MPS, and a member of this House from 1984 to 2003. Two, that this resolution be communicated by the President to his family. I move this condolence motion today, both as a friend of John Jobling and as a long-term party colleague. This is indeed a melancholy duty, and that I carry today with great respect and honour on behalf of government members and indeed the chamber. I acknowledge John's two daughters who are here with us today, Mandy and Penny, in the President's Gallery. I also acknowledge the spirit of John's devoted wife and party giant in her own right, the late Lindy Jobling, OAM. In his valedictory speech, John, of course, thanked his family, particularly Lindy, as well as all the members of his family, who he said, quote, equally had to put up with father's peccadilloes of not being around for many of life's small events. He said to you at that time, I did my best, and I think I have been forgiven. It can be a difficult journey being the family of a parliamentarian, so I want to thank you sincerely for your sacrifice in sharing your father with our state. I also acknowledge the former members of Parliament present today, both here, the Honourable John Hannaford, and also viewing on the web broadcast. John Jobling was born in Sydney in 1937, a difficult time for the nation and the world, as the shadow of World War II marked the first 8 years of his life. War must surely have been one of his earliest impressions of his young life. John grew up in Sydney and attended the Scots College and Sydney Boys High School before going to study at the University of Sydney. After graduating from university, John commenced looking at places he might go to practice as a pharmacist. He considered towns all over New South Wales before deciding on Scone. This decision led to John spending more than 30 years as a respected member of the Upper Hunter community. While living in Muswellbrook, John became involved in the local Liberal Party in 1968. This joined John with a proud legacy of Newcastle and Upper Hunter Liberals, including the recently honoured Virginia Chadwick. In this same year, John became an alderman on the Muswellbrook Municipality Shire. This was the beginning of an over 20-year-long career in local government. John described the decision to first run for local government in a typical way. He said, having criticised local government for some time, I had the option to put up or just shut up. So in my usual manner, I put up my hand and was duly elected, and that's a philosophy of John's life. This reflects a long-running thread in John's approach to life. Rather than waiting for someone else to fix the problems or to help their community, he put up his hand and would do it himself. Over the course of a long career in local government on either side of his parliamentary career, commencing in '68 and concluding at Leichhardt Council, John served on 3 councils as an alderman, a councillor, a deputy mayor, a president and a chairman. In addition to being a member of local councils, John also served with distinction on the Local Government Energy Association of New South Wales as executive member, treasurer, vice president and president, and John was also a member of the Electricity Board of the Energy Authority of New South Wales. Before talking about John's contributions to this place, I'll just touch briefly on the scope and scale of his community service as a private citizen. Over the course of his life, John was a member of the Scone Muswellbrook Apex, the Muswellbrook Rotary, the Muswellbrook Returned Servicemen's League, the Randwick Rugby Club, the conservation organisation called Shortlands Wetlands, the Muswellbrook Shire State Emergency Services, the Civil Defence, the Royal Prince Alfred Yacht Club, the disability charity called Primary Club of Australia, the Baden Power Society and the Red Cross Muswellbrook branch, just to name a few. He was a busy man. This is a phenomenal effort, not just for the number of organisations and charities that John worked with, but the diversity of them. This is a testament to both John's passion for supporting his community, but also the breadth of his talent and the many ways he had capacity to help others from diverse backgrounds. For these many public services, John was awarded in 2004 the Order of Australia, later upgraded in 2021 to a full member. John's first foray into parliamentary service came when he ran for the federal seat of Paterson in the 1969 election. John was one of 15 people who contested the pre-selection for the Liberal Party for the seat after the retirement of the incumbent member, Sir Alan Fairhill. After his pre-selection success, John unfortunately fell short by a few hundred votes to winning the seat. This was arguably the result of multiple factors, including a country and Liberal Party contest splitting, the non-Labor vote, and the presence of a Democratic Labor candidate, one of the few in that election who preferenced Labor ahead of the Liberals. However, the federal parliament's loss was to be a win for this place and for the people of New South Wales. It was 14 years later, in 1983, that John would make a successful bid to become a parliamentarian. However, doing so wouldn't be easy, and running up in the running up for Liberal pre-selection for the Legislative Council. It never is. John was up against 31 other nominees. After initially whittling down the list to 20 remaining candidates, John was the lucky 13th to address the exhausted pre-selectors. Liberal folklore has it that in order to attract attention and distinguish himself from the rest of the candidates, he told a fairy tale to the pre-selectors. You can imagine his baritone voice booming, regaling the exhausted party members with the fairy tale. As funny as it sounds, it actually worked. John was subsequently pre-selected and then elected to this chamber. Though members of the Legislative Council were directly elected from 1978 onwards, this reform was implemented in a rolling manner. This made John a member of the first entirely directly elected Legislative Council. As he described in his maiden speech to this place, I think it's important, quote, "The date 24th of March 1984 was indeed a watershed in the history of the Legislative Council of New South Wales. For it was on this day that the final step in the current transformation of the Legislative Council was completed. The Legislative Council is indeed now a completely different chamber from any of its predecessors, inasmuch as all its members are now elected directly by the public at the state elections. It is now indeed a full-time house, a working legislature, a genuine house of review." When John first came to Parliament, there were 5 staff who served the coalition parties. This was soon increased to 7. However, this still meant 7 people had to serve 45 members of Liberal and National parties in the Parliament. John was involved in reforming this arrangement when the Greiner government was formed in 1988. I think we all thank him for that. In 1988, John was appointed the Government Whip in the Legislative Council, a position he absolutely relished. He would hold the Coalition Whip position for nearly 15 years in government and in opposition. John described his role as Whip as keeping an eye on the sheep and ensuring none escaped from the paddock. While the position has evolved since then, there is no doubt that John's discipline and competence and the respect he commanded is responsible for many of the Greiner government's positive achievements being legislated through this place at the time. I, as the Chief of Staff to President Max Willis and a young Liberal State President in 1993-94, came to know John quite well. His office, as Government Whip, was just down the corridor outside the President's office, just down from my office corridor, in fact. And it was decorated with several fierce-looking stock whips on the wall. Very intimidating. President Willis would often send me there with messages about pairs or other requests, and it usually resulted in numerous firm reprimands from the whip, which I was supposed to relay to the President. I still recall them very fondly today. In both his maiden and valedictory speeches, John noted the important role of the Legislative Council and bicameral governments everywhere play in ensuring no government of the day has an unencumbered ability to legislate. In articulating this view, he quoted John Stuart Mill, a majority in a single assembly easily becomes despotic and overweening if released from the necessity of considering its authority. In this fashion, John was a supporter of the committee system in the Legislative Council as an effective means of reviewing legislation and providing balance on issues. He applauded the progression towards the committee system in his maiden speech and thought back fondly on its strengthening in his valedictory speech. I'm sure John was impressed and perhaps a little shocked at how far the committee system has come since then. In 2003, John commended the introduction in his time of 5 general-purpose standing committees. We now have 16 standing committees in the Legislative Council with oversight of legislation as well as the governance of this place. This is an achievement John helped to set in motion with his long-standing defence and support of the committee system. John was a character and a much-loved, respected member of the Liberal Party. He was for many years a creature of the party and, of course, for most of those years, the anchor for the Hunter Liberals. He was also one of the party members in this place who did not accept attempts by external forces to push the Liberal Party to the hard right of the political spectrum. John and Lindy fought the good fight to keep the New South Wales Liberal Party a right-of-centre party based on the ideals of liberalism, and for that we thank them. I will conclude with a message from one of his contemporaries, who we all think of fondly as well, the Honourable Dr Brian Pizzuti, who sent me a message, quote, "John Jobling was the world's best whip, kind and straight to a fault, a wise counsel and a discreet adviser, a long speaker when required and a witty responder. He will be remembered as one of nature's truly gifted gentlemen." The Honourable John Jobling, AM, PhD, MPS, member of this House, 1984 to 2003, a family man, a community leader, a parliamentarian, a law party servant, valet.